Hey there, leader. I know how overwhelming leadership can be. I mean, trust me, I've been there. But my goal is pretty simple. I want to help you thrive. I want to help you find that sweet harmony between your professional drive and your personal life. And on my podcast, I love diving into the headaches of leadership and sharing real actionable solutions that'll help you not just survive, but thrive. And we talk about how to rise professionally without sacrificing your family life. And I even get pretty real about stories of struggle and triumph on finding harmony between both worlds. And I am beyond grateful that you are tuning into the podcast and following and engaging on social media and working on your personal growth. But did you know I'd love to walk alongside you personally on your leadership journey? I don't just preach personal development, I live it out. And that's why I'm super excited to share that I'm now a member of the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. This means I can bring you the teachings of John C. Maxwell. Yes, the John C. Maxwell, the country's #1 leadership authority. Now, this certification just isn't about me leveling up. It's about showing you that I'm committed to delivering the very best guidance for you and your team. And if you're ready to transform your leadership, hop on over to leadershipontherocks.com and click that schedule a call button. Whether it's personal development, company wide training, or going through change management, let's connect and start your journey of success together. Again, that's leadershipontherocks.com. Let's thrive together. Hey, Leadership on the Rocks community. I just wanted to give you a quick warning about today's show. It's going to be awesome. We're talking about humility, but there is a curse word in the title of the book we're discussing. So I just wanted to give you that warning in case you have little ears around. Enjoy the show.
Let's be real. Many of us operate in a top-down command control culture still. And so there I encourage all of us to create our own humble leadership excellence pocket. Instead of looking up and across and throwing up our hands in frustration, let's look down. You can actually make a real difference in your team, no matter what everybody else around you is doing. And guess what? People will notice.
This is the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, where we equip and empower leaders like you to thrive in and create harmony between your professional and personal lives. I'm your host, Bethany Reese, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking with former UN and NATO peacekeeper, professor, and bestselling author Oars COnig about why humble leadership is the key to winning in today's world. Oars is a former United Nations military peacekeeper and NATO military peacekeeping commander, a highly accomplished ultra-endurance champion, a widely published professor, best-selling author, and a seasoned executive coach and keynote speaker with more than 3 decades of experience helping hundreds of leaders and dozens of executive teams unlock new levels of achievement across 4 continents. You heard me right, 4 continents. He is the founder of the Radical Humility Leadership Institute and speaks frequently on the topic of leadership to corporations and associations across the globe. His message of radical humility and leadership has inspired teams from across the spectrum, including Amazon, Starbucks, the Society of Human Resource Management, Vistage, the University of Melbourne, and Microsoft. He holds a PhD in geography and a Master of Science from the University of Zurich, Switzerland, and an MBA from the Australian Graduate School of Management. Oars is a loving father of 2 teenage boys who make commanding soldiers look easy. He lives in Seattle, Washington. Welcome to the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, Oars. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, Bethany. What an intro. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
I just love everything that I read and everything that I've learned about you in my research. So honestly, and just hearing your bio, it sounds like you've lived hundreds of lives with thousands of adventures. I'm almost thinking like James Bond type stuff, even though I know you weren't a spy, but you've literally been all over the world. You've served all kinds of people groups. So could you just start off with telling us about your background and what led you to being the expert on humility, which is today's key topic?
Absolutely. So I do have a very eclectic background, as you pointed out. I started out as a collegiate level cross-country skier, actually in my home country of Switzerland, where I sort of, gained my first leadership experience as a coach later as well. I served in the Swiss Armed Forces. We all do. We have a national service model in Switzerland, where I also experienced leadership, of course. And then I was an academic for quite a few years. I was actually a geographer. I studied the impact of climate change on the various tourism industries. And after that, in my late 20s, that brought me to Australia, actually. So I lived and studied in Australia doing my academic work, and then transitioned into management consulting very briefly before I charted out on my own into a path that we're both very passionate about, which is leadership development. I've been an executive coach for the best part of the last 24 years. And then, as you pointed out in the intro, I decided at age 50 to rejoin the military to serve as a peacekeeper for the NATO mission in the Balkans, in Kosovo. I was there for 9 months. And then 2 years ago, I deployed to the Middle East, where I served for the UN for a year, where apparently I did not do a very good job, seeing what's going on right now, sadly. But so then I came back from that peacekeeping mission 2 years ago, and we can talk more about, why humility. But then I really dug deep into the importance of humility in leadership. And then, the outcome of that research, of that quest, is, of course, the book that I just published. But I love people. So that's why, people often ask me, why are you interested in leadership? Any leadership position is a people's business. So I love people. I love achieving hard things together with others who I care about, be it a long ultra distance race, or helping a client through a difficult transition, or, trying to bring peace to a conflict region. So achieving hard things or working on hard problems together with people I care about, like that really gets my mojo going. So, so that's my journey a little bit.
I love it. It's such a fascinating background. And you can just tell that you do love people because you're willing to step in some of the hardest conflict filled areas in order to try to bring peace to that. And I love that. So let's talk about your new book. I have been reading it. I love it. Your book, Radical Humility, Be a Badass Leader and a Good Human. It just came out. And first of all, the title, I love that title so much. So I want to know what led you to writing that book on humility, because humility really is historically a buzzword in leadership.
Right, absolutely. So I was always drawn on a personal level to humble people. So in my ultra cycling career, I really always was drawn to competitors who, let their legs do the talking versus their big mouth. So I was always drawn to highly successful folks who constantly were learning and growing, and who had the humility to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out. So I was always drawn to humility as a personal trait. But then as an executive coach, as we came out of the financial crisis, 07, 08, and social media started to explode, I experienced my clients, my executive coaching clients, as always seemingly being a step behind. A lot of them were still leading very traditional top-down command control, and they always were a step behind. And so that sort of got me thinking, we need a different sort of leadership. And then Ed and Peter Shine published their wonderful book, Humble Leadership, and that sort of piqued my interest. And of course, Jim Collins, wrote for the first time in the leadership arena in Good to Great about humility in leadership, almost whatever it is now, 23 years ago. So, so that sort of got me interested in, maybe humility can play a role in leadership to be successful. And then two things happened. I deployed in my 2 peacekeeping missions, as I mentioned. And counterintuitively, going back into a top-down command control culture, what we think of as outsiders of the military being, actually showed me that the best commanders are deeply humble leaders. They develop great self-awareness, they build meaningful and collaborative relationships with their teammates, and they deploy a growth mindset. And so I experienced that. And then, of course, COVID happened. Right. And so when the world shut down, we all had to humbly admit, even to the highest office in this country, that we don't know what the future holds. And humility sort of, bubbled up to the surface in the business literature, in leadership articles as well. And so then when I came back from my second peacekeeping mission a couple of years ago, I then very seriously sat down and researched exactly how humility can play a crucial role in leadership and why it's actually key to winning in today's world. And so the output of that quest, of that research, is of course the book.
Oh, I love it. And we've talked so much about humility here on this podcast specifically. It tends to come up so much because you are, as a leader, serving other people, and you're going to experience plenty of opportunities that will humble you. They will knock your legs right out from under you, especially when you are, fighting to provide structure and progress and somewhat add control to the chaos that you're exposed to. But as soon as you hit those situations where you have no control, man, you're going to be humbled. So it's coming. It's whether or not you're going to learn the lesson from it. So humility for a long time was misconstrued as weakness, like exactly what you were talking about. That leadership that has been modeled for us for decades, if not centuries, is very top down. You do not show humility because it's a weakness. So, can you give us a baseline for just understanding what do you mean when you say radical humility? Like, what is humble leadership? Can you kind of define that a little bit more for us?
Absolutely. So I think of radical humility or humble leadership as a three-legged stool. So the first leg is deep self-awareness. So that's what people often think of when they think of humility. I see myself accurately, like not too high, and also, by the way, not too low, but accurately. So I have a strong self-awareness. I understand myself in line with how others see me. I also, and that, I write about that, of course, in the book as well, it's this notion of focus. I have the humility to know that I can't do everything, but I can do almost anything if I put my heart and mind to it. So the value focus, and then, the growth mindset on a personal level. How do I see mistakes and setbacks that we all experience as an opportunity for learning and growing versus something to be ashamed of? So, or, more sweep under the carpet. So that's the first leg of the stool, deep self-awareness. The second leg of the stool is leading relationally on a one-on-one basis with my team members, seeing my team members as whole people who come to work versus just, cogs in a wheel who get stuff done for us. And so there I think about the fact that we're actually facing an inversion of expertise today as leaders. Our people will always know so much more than we ever can about their specific area of expertise. For them to come to us with the data and the information we so clearly rely on, they need to trust us. And the only way they'll trust us is if we've built and worked on building strong and collaborative relationships with them. And we can talk more about that. By the way, that doesn't mean I being nice to everybody. Sometimes, and that's why it's also a badass leader. The most loving thing I can sometimes do is actually to let somebody go. And so it's having the highest standards, tough on results, and tender on people while building meaningful collaborative relationships with them. So that's the second leg of the stool. And then the third leg is leading relationally on an organizational level. And there I'm leaning, of course, on the great work that primarily Amy Edmondson has done out of Harvard at building a psychologically safe, a fearless culture where it's safe for anybody on my team to speak up with questions, concerns, raise doubts without fear of being shamed or worse, risking their career. And then undergirding the three legs is the growth mindset, which we're also familiar with, which is so easy to talk about and so hard to actually implement. Not feeling ashamed, not being flooded by my strong emotions when I fail, especially when I fail publicly, but actually learning. So I know that's a lot, but that's sort of the definition in a nutshell.
But it's so good. And I love that you talk so much about the undergirding of yourself. Right? All of this is with a three-legged stool. It's so internal. And we think leadership is so external, right? It's about, and you are serving other people. But man, if you don't do the internal work on yourself first and have an accurate picture, like what you said, accurate picture of who you are, your strengths, your constraints. If you don't understand how to build relationships with other people and understand how you need to reach out in order to build that bridge and not just say there is no bridge, or two, you build the bridge. I'm not coming to you. You come to me. That's not building relationships. And then that growth mindset. And I love that you pointed out it's easy to say, but it's so hard to do because it takes the internal work. So guys, you've got to sit in time of reflection and think on these things. And now I want to dive into, because you were so spot on when you were talking about previous leadership of just top down and how we've got to make this shift in leadership with humility, focusing on relationships, talking about safe environments. This is a newer concept in the dawn of time of leadership. So now, and in your book, you point this out, you have then leadership and you have now leadership. And our goal is to shift from then leadership to now leadership. So can you define those 2 points of leadership for us, then leadership and now leadership?
Absolutely. You're such a great you have an education background. I can tell. Your questions are so to the point. I just love it, Bethany. It's so good. So good. So then leadership is what you point out, heroic top-down leadership that has served, for, we can argue decently well for the last, I don't know how many 100 years. So this is where the leader sits on top of the org chart, is the smartest person in the room, has all the answers, makes all the calls, him or herself, and all the information flows through him or her. So that's, in a nutshell, then leadership. And now leadership is humble leadership. Now leadership is about being self-aware enough that I know where I'm not good at, where I need to hire. The best leaders, the best humble leaders are so self-aware that they actually surround themselves with people that are smarter than them. You want smarter people on your team, and you have the humility to have other people shine on your team. You're the catalyst to bring the best out of everybody on your team. So the now leadership really is leading with radical humility.
And it makes me want to work for that person. Everything that you just described with the now leadership, I'm like, I want to work for that boss. I don't want to work for the then, boss type boss. But let's be real. Guess what's been modeled for us? All of the then leadership. It is such a hard dynamic to walk through. If I feel so called to transform into this now leadership, but all that's modeled for me has been then leadership, and what I'm currently working in my organization is used to the then leadership, the power, the authority, the everything comes top to bottom. How do we shift to now leadership?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is actually, let's think about this. So this is sort of the intellectual part. So leadership in today's, fast-moving, complex world, let's think about it. It's actually by definition humbling. No one person can know it all or do it all. And, I just pointed out the inversion of expertise. So we actually need to rely on smarter people, subject experts in their area on our team to get the job done. So I argue that, the famous VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, actually mandates humility, constantly learning and growing. And so that's number 2. The workforce demands it. All the studies show that the younger folks entering the workforce, they thrive on relationships. They want a lot of things. They want purpose. They want meaning in their work. And all the studies show that they actually value relationships, strong relationships and meaningful relationships at work almost as much as they value money and salary. So that's sort of the intellectual part. So thinking about that, and that it's actually, I put forward, mandated humble leadership for today's environment. And then, to your point, let's be real. Many of us operate in a top-down command control culture still. And so there I encourage all of us to create our own, I call it humble leadership excellence pocket. So, instead of looking, and this is borrowed from Amy Edmondson as well, instead of looking up and across and throwing up our hands in frustration because, these bosses are hopeless, I can't do anything here. Let's look down. You have your team, you have your whatever it is, 5, 7, 12 direct reports. You can actually make a real difference in your team, no matter what everybody else around you is doing. And, guess what? People will notice. So that's, we can employ or deploy radical humility, create our own pocket of humble leadership excellence, even in a top-down command control culture. And then, in terms of very concrete things, like all these things are very simple, but they're not easy. It's as simple as starting to ask our team members at the end of every one-on-one, which I sure hope you do every week with your team members, because guess what? The most important currency you have as a leader, as a manager, is your time and attention with your people. Ask at the end of every one-on-one, hey, Bethany, what do I do well as your manager? And what can I do better? That's a first tiny step in increasing our self-awareness. And don't blindside your people. Maybe you want to announce in a department or in your team meeting that you're going to start asking these feedback questions, and then do it regularly, every week. So it becomes a normal thing to do versus this big, scary stuff we do once a year or, maybe every 6 months. And so that's, it's so simple, but ask for feedback. What can I do better? And what do I do well? And I mean, I've had plenty of flaws as a leader. There's no question about it. But that one I actually, throughout my career, did quite well. I constantly ask for feedback from my team members, and I learned about a lot of things, tiny small things I could fix immediately before they became bigger things. So that's, one step, tiny step in terms of a meaningful step in terms of increasing our self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And then the second piece is, the relationship building piece. So this is leaning on Ed Shine's work. Draw your own relationship map. So assess your quality of relationships. Grab a piece of paper, put a circle in the center, that's you, and then draw a circle around you with all the people you're connected to. This is your family, your friends, your direct reports at work, your boss, other departments, HR, finance, operations, whatever, and then assess the quality of relationship on a scale of 1 to 5 you have with each of these people. And then ask yourself this: what's the level of relationship I should have with that person?
Ooh,
the level of trust, good. The level of cooperation, and then identify the 2 relationships with the biggest gap between where they are today and where they should be. And then set a 15, 30-minute Zoom call or coffee meeting with that person to get to know them on a more meaningful personal level. So these are sort of 2 very tactical things we can immediately implement to move towards now leadership, to move towards humble leadership.
I love it. Just everything that I just heard, this is kind of what was playing in my mind, is first you said you don't have to know the answer. So humility is recognizing that. And internally, I just had this huge sigh of relief of, guess where imposter syndrome comes from? That fear of, I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the skill sets. I'm not good enough to be here kind of thing. And you're just saying, let's just kick that out of the way, because you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have all the answers. Take that humility route. And then the second thing is, we do get so frustrated. I know I have so many stories, and I'm sure everybody does, about when you work for the boss and you're like, he doesn't have his act together, or she doesn't have their act together. So you're looking up, you're looking sideways, and you're just this ball of frustration. But you're kind of calling us out of that victim mentality of saying, okay, so things above you, things beside you aren't going so well. What can you control? What are you in charge of? How can you be a good steward of your team and take steps forward? And you're calling us out of that victim mentality. And I love it, because we so need it. And then the relationship piece, as you're talking about building all these relationships. And I love that you said, whether it be a Zoom or a coffee chat. And I'm like, guess where relationship bridges are built? It's on the personal side. It's usually not about work and tasks. Yeah. It's getting to know them, their family. Hey, how's your daughter? Hey, how did this thing go that weekend? That builds that bridge that connects the communication, so that the work and all those, work horses and carts can go across the bridge later. It's built on the personal side of things. And you just nailed all those 3 things out in your last 2 minutes. It was amazing.
So Bethany, one thing, thank you for that. One thing I do want to stress, though, I think is very important. Humility is no replacement for competence. So we need to work on all the things I put forward in my book. And by the way, the soft stuff is not soft. The soft stuff is tough, right? The soft stuff of, for example, asking for feedback is tough, right? And so let's be real about that. But coming back to, humility is no replacement for competence. I went back into the military, and my military knowledge was outdated after 22 years. And so in parallel to building strong collaborative relationships with my team members and, living and working on being a really humble leader, I also worked my sweet behind off in terms of getting better at the technical skills. And so I want to be very clear, humility, vulnerability, that's no replacement for competence. So we must do both. I think that's an important point to stress.
Absolutely. And in the book, your first 90 days, he talks about the on-ramp of how, everybody else is already driving on that really fast freeway, and you better get up to speed on that on-ramp fast. Do your research, become competent. So I love that. There is that balance there. Thank you for pointing that out. It's so good. So as we shift from then leadership to now leadership, you've talked about the internal work we have to do. You talked about the relationship building. Is there anything else beyond those 2 that helps extend our humility so that we can grow and make a better impact today with humility? Are there any other shifts?
Absolutely. So one of the things I love and I write about in the book is this notion of turning my team into a leadership factory. And so that's, the humble mindset of taking great pride in my people's success. And so rather than being frustrated when my people move on, because let's be real, they all will move on eventually. And we are too, by the way. So making it the explicit goal for my team members to go to the next level, however this might look. Not everybody needs or should become a manager. You might, promote somebody to become a guru or a subject expert, but really setting yourself the goal to help everybody on your team to go to the next level. And guess what? Your good people will actually hang around longer. The more we challenge them, the more we stretch them, the more we help to go to the next level. And when they do move on, they become ambassadors for our cause. So in a large corporation, I've seen this so many times. I think I write about an example in my book. My teammate gets promoted to finance, to the finance department somewhere, and we always had issues with finance. But now we have our former teammate there. We can just pick up the phone and she takes care of our needs. So that's sort of the ambassador effect as well. And then boomerang employees, if we treat our people well to the very end, before they move up, they might actually return. I mean, I think I've seen studies where almost a third of new employees are actually boomerang employees. You want to be the first person they think of when they think of coming back. And they will all only think of you if you've treated them well to the very end and, build this leadership factory. And then, and lastly, a lot of the clients and leaders I work with in the later stages of their career, they see that as their legacy. Sure, we achieved amazing shareholder returns and produced amazing products. That's amazing. But most of them take real pride in the success of the people they grew and they're mentored along the way. So I sort of challenge us to, instead of in fear, hold on to our people and be worried that we lose them, actually take pride in them going to the next level. And by the way, then word gets around. If I know that on Bethany's team, people go left and right and get new opportunities, guess where I want to work? I want to work for Bethany. So you become a talent magnet. So that's another humble leadership skill or approach that I really like to point out that helps us to really grow ourselves, our team, and the whole organization.
It is so true. It's like an investment. When you are humble enough to say it's not about me, it's about other people, and you start investing in other people, you're right. That word of mouth is magnet, that talent management, they just flock to you. And we know that we have labor shortages out there where people are no longer loyal to companies. We've heard it said a bunch of times that people don't leave organizations, they leave bosses, they leave managers. Yep. And so if you become that person that's constantly serving and building up and investing in other people, but I want to go back to what you said earlier. When you were talking about humility, you kind of touched on this point of you're kind, but you're not nice. And you said, you give the feedback, you say the hard message. And I love what you're saying. Humility actually takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of backbone. And so I want to press into that because as you're growing your leadership pipeline, as you're investing in other people, you're going to be having conversations with people to grow them. And sometimes those conversations aren't easy to have. It's giving that feedback. And that takes safety, emotionally, but also you got to know how to deliver that hard message in a way in which it can be received. So can you talk to us about how to, as you call it in the book, be tough on results and grow your people and get the things done, but be tender on people? How do we go through that dynamic?
Well, let me answer this actually with a quick little story. So I was in my peacekeeping command in Kosovo. I was sitting in my boss's office. And he opened the conversation with these words. He said, "Oars, I love you. You know I do. And this work that you delivered is not even close to being good enough."
Oh.
Exactly, right? So maybe shrink in my chair. And because I knew if he would have yelled at me, if he would have, belittled me, I would have tuned him out. But because I knew, and of course, we've built a strong relationship over the last 6 months, he cared for me. He knew about my, not all my personal. By the way, humility doesn't mean I need to, tell you all my darkest secrets. No, it doesn't. But I need to see my people and I want to be seen as a whole person. So he knew my, personal situation. He took interest in my career path. So I knew he cared about me. And that then made it so much more impactful for me to hear that message. And I turned myself inside out to deliver the very best work I could to his desk from this day forward. And so, this notion that we either have to be a kind person or a tough leader really is a false dichotomy. We can all do hard things in a human way. So we can take real keen interest in our team members. And yes, sometimes you're just not a fit for the job. And we've tried everything. And I'm making the call. I mean, I had to fire, I'm not sure I write about this, but I had to fire my warrant officer early in the training, actually. And it was incredibly hard because he was very motivated, very engaged, very willing, but he just didn't have the skills. So, you have to make the call. And this may be almost too tactical, but it should never be a surprise when you give your people feedback. And frankly, when you let them go, they should never be surprised, because you've done the work up to this day of constantly providing feedback, so that when the day comes that you potentially need to part ways, it's never a surprise.
I love it. And I say this all the time because I learned the hard way. My first couple of years in leadership, I learned really quickly. Number one, your lack of performance is on me, because I have to ask myself, was I clear in my expectations? And the majority of that is no. And then number two, did I provide training support that will help you be successful? And again, a lot of that answer is no. You cannot send somebody to a 1-day training or a 1-hour Zoom and think that they have everything that they need to be successful in the job. But then three is, if they're still unsuccessful after you can answer yes to number one, I was clear in my expectations. Number two, I provided you the training. Then I'm being kind by telling you this is not working out. I release you of this obligation in which you're not successful in to go do something that you will be successful in. That is loving on that human. And I love it that you're talking about that, how we could be tough on results, but tender on people. So as we kind of transition, you kind of end the book with this fearless culture. And we know culture is a big buzzword in leadership, but usually fearless isn't put in front of it. It's positive. It's positive culture. All the feel goods. I want you to dive into fearless. What do you mean by fearless culture?
So fearless culture is a psychologically safe culture, right? So it's a culture where it's safe for all of us to ask questions. Imagine this: ask a question I don't know the answer to. Right? How many times do people ask questions? Do we ask questions because we want to show off how smart we are? So anyway, ask a question we don't know the answer to, challenge the leader, but it's safe to challenge ideas, but it's safe to challenge the leader. So that's a psychologically safe culture. And what we need to do there, I have a little framework in the book. We need to first reframe failure for our team members. We need to make it clear that I have the highest expectations of all of us, including myself, and mistakes will still happen. By the way, on every flight, there's going to be mistakes. That's really sucks for us frequent flyers, but there are mistakes made on every single flight. So there's this United Airlines captain who opens every crew meeting with these words. He said, "I've never done a perfect flight before, and I'm going to prove it to you again today. So I need you. I need you to speak up when you see me make a mistake, because it will happen, and I will do the same for you." That's reframing failure and encouraging speaking up. The pilot knows there never will be a perfect flight, much like for all of us, like for you, for me, there never will be a perfect podcast, a perfect book, a perfect client deliverables. There just isn't. So what the airline captain does is making it safe for everybody to speak up. So mistakes that are made by individuals are caught by the collective. And as a result, of course, the most important outcome improves, which is the flight. So it's this notion of reframing failure, encouraging speaking up, and then acknowledging and thanking, which that is so hard to do. Even if we disagree with what's being said, our first response always needs to be, "Thank you, Bethany, for bringing this up," sincerely and not smirking, because everybody's watching you. Now, that's one of the things I think many leaders sort of are not aware of. The show is always on. You're constantly on stage. Everybody's watching you. And if you, dismiss, smirk, sort of, disrespectful body language or facial expressions when somebody brings up a point or speaks up, you bet next time nobody will speak up. So it's this acknowledging and thanking. I write about Alan Mullally in the book, who turned around the Ford company. It's a few years ago now. And he walked into his first senior management team meeting, and all the dashboard indicators were on green versus yellow or red, meaning everything was going great. So he turns to his team and says, "Guys, come on, we're losing millions of dollars every day. Isn't there anything that's going wrong?" And so at the next team meeting, the dashboard indicator for Mark Fields, who eventually actually succeeded him as a CEO, was on red. And so when it was his time to speak, he said, as you can see, we're holding the release of the Edge, which was a highly anticipated car. And the whole room went silent. Everybody looked at Mullally, the CEO, and at David Fields, who just spoke up and thought, dead man walking. What did Mullally do? Did he scold him? Did he chew him out? No, he started to clap. He started to clap and said, this is great visibility, Mark. Who can help Mark with this? So it took another, few meetings of mainly green dashboard indicators until people were realizing that we don't get fired if we actually tell the real story, because everybody knows we're losing millions of dollars. And so over time, more dashboard indicators, orange and red, and the team could go to work and actually turn the full company around. So that's acknowledging and thanking at its best.
It's so good. And it takes the work of building that culture, because as you move up in leadership, the truth that is shared with you goes down. People do not feel comfortable in sharing with you what they really think. And it's hard to get feedback. So you have to work extra hard to make that culture safe so that people will tell you the truth. Otherwise, I've said this, I feel like almost every episode. Otherwise, you're like the emperor with no clothes on, right? Where you're parading around. Nobody wants to tell you the truth because they're fearful of you. So you got to work really hard.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the higher we rise, the funnier our jokes get. Let's be real. Not just because of they don't laugh at my joke, they laugh at my position's joke. So I think then, there's a really key point you're bringing up there. What that then means, though, is if I'm in this, if I rise up to the organization, I need to make a real effort in having people on my team who actually tell me the truth. And I need to, of course, build a whole culture that's happening. But, the best leaders in very high offices, political and in business, actually have their truth teller, right? The no BS people who, they can turn to. I know presidents actually of this country have that. The person who actually tells them as it is. And sometimes it's a spouse, right? So truth, really important.
I love it. So good. Well, Oars, you have shared so much wisdom with us about how we can shift from the then leadership, which is very top down, very authoritative, to the now leadership was very humble. It's transparent. It is, understanding where you're at, what your strengths and constraints are, and then building up other people, very leading with humility. So what are some key takeaways that our listeners need to apply to grow in their leadership?
Well, I might repeat myself here, but I think actually, coming back to the self-awareness, regularly ask for feedback and suggestions on how you can do better in the future, what Marshall Goldsmith calls feed forward. So regular feedback, have your regular feedback cycles going with your direct reports, with your peers as well, and of course, with your boss. Build strong relationships. Just, again, we don't need to go deep with everybody, but push yourself to be a bit more vulnerable than you normally would be and see what comes back, right? Relationship building always starts with a conversation. And then maybe a first step for a fearless culture is actually having a conversation in my team on how do we deal with failures? How do we as a team make this enough? When's the last time we had a conversation, or, listeners, when's the last time you had a conversation with your team about how are we dealing with mistakes and failures on this team? And how should we deal with it? So that's maybe a first great step in shifting our team towards a psychologically safe, fearless culture.
Oh, so good. So good. And you know what I was thinking when you were talking about the first one with feedback? My mind went to, whoa, am I asking my family for feedback? Am I asking my children? I want to be a humble leader, not just at work, but at home too. And it's amazing what you would learn from your children if you just ask them, hey, how did I come across here whenever we were having this hard conversation, or when I was disciplining? I don't know, get their feedback. Why not? Why not take it into parenting?
I totally agree with you, 100%. And also, so totally. I mean, I do that with my kids on a semi-regular basis with my teenage boys. I want to be clear though there as well that leadership is not a popularity contest. I always ask, I just thought about this, of course, because you brought up the children. I always ask, I always listen, I always thank, but I actually decide how and if I act on the feedback. So I think that's very important. It can be overwhelming when we start to ask for feedback. There's a million things we could do differently and are suggested to us, but that's then the introspection you talked earlier on, journaling, maybe having a close relationship with a professional or somebody in our personal lives where we really workshop and talk through this feedback and then decide I'm going to actually do X, Y, Z, because we only can do 3 things, not 7 or 10.
And I feel like you just gave a huge warning there to all of our people pleasers out there. The people who, when they hear feedback, they feel like they have to do it all. And you're just saying, no, you don't have to. You do need to ask the question, listen, thank them for it, but then you decide, which one you're going to take action on. So you don't feel like you have to do everything. Oh, that was a great warning. So moving into all the things that we should do, I want to ask the opposite of something we shouldn't do. What is one poor decision our leaders should avoid where you're like, come on, leaders, don't do this one thing. You're better than that.
You just said it, Bethany. Don't think that being a humble leader means you're a people pleaser. Don't be a pushover. You can be tough on results and tender on people. You can be a badass and get results and be a good human. So don't confuse the two.
Oh, love it. Love that clarity. Thank you so much. So, Oars, where can our listeners go to learn more about you, your work, and where can we go buy your book, Radical Humility?
Absolutely. If you're in the States, you can buy my book on Amazon or on my website. You can find me on my website for my keynote speaking, for my workshop at oarsconig.com. And of course, I'm active on social, primarily on LinkedIn is where I'm most active. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. I will have links to all of that in the show notes and on social media. You guys know I cut these clips and there'll be links to him everywhere. So, Oars, thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom and helping us become more humble in our leadership. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
All right. Guys, until next time, continue putting in the work of building your life and leadership on the rocks, the essential rocks. God bless. Remember, the most essential rock you can build your life and leadership on is the rock of Jesus Christ. Today's Bible verse comes from Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Hey, it's Bethany again. If you're enjoying the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss a single episode. Also, be sure to rate the show. We hope to earn 5 stars in serving you in leadership, and through your ratings, it'll help us get the word out about what we do here at Leadership on the Rocks. If you feel this podcast is helpful, be sure to share it with your friends, family, and coworkers, or anyone who wants to grow in leadership, but also have harmony between their work and home life. Thanks, and I'll see you again in the next episode.